Hello there, everyone. I hope you're doing well. With me today, I've got another find from my school surplus store. It's a late 2011 Apple Macbook Pro. It's the 15-inch variation. There were also 13 and 17-inch variations sold, but this one right here is the 15-inch variation. I ran into it when I was at the store on Friday, and what jumped out to me immediately was the price tag. As you can see right here, it's only $10, and I know this is an old machine, but getting any MacBook for $10 is definitely gonna get my head turning. So I figured I might as well pick it up and experiment with it and see if I can get it running, because at the surplus store it was actually listed as for parts, which you might be able to see some black marks up here on the top of the cover. That's because typically with old computers, this store, they'll write, usually in a marker or some other utensil, they'll write 4 parts and then they'll write whatever's in it. And from experience, 4 parts doesn't actually mean that it's broken. Usually it just means that they took the drive out, which in this case they did, and it means that they didn't test it after that. So I figured, $10, what's the risk? I might as well mess around with it, see if I can get it working. But I figured before I do that, might as well do another one of my little overview videos, because I do like doing those. So just getting right into the device right away, you'll be able to see pretty clearly. It's got a nice aluminum chassis all around. It's in very good shape. If I move it around, you'll be able to see no real cosmetic damage visible. Obviously you can see there's a little bit of gunk on the machine, but nothing bad. It's in good shape, which I like. And as you can see, if I open it up a little bit, move it around, I know I'm not zoomed out much, but you can get a general idea of the design. It's using Apple's unibody design, which they were using on pretty much all of their Macs around this time. The Retina Macs wouldn't come out until about 8 or 9 months after this device released, so still using the unibody design, which I'm very much a fan of. It's actually aged pretty well, computer size aside, because it is pretty thick, but that's not a huge deal. But since that's the chassis, I figured I might as well show you guys some of the I/O ports. Right here, if I can get my camera to focus, on the left we have a MagSafe 1 charging port, which this computer actually requires an 85-watt AC adapter. I tried plugging this thing in earlier with a 60-watt adapter, or maybe it was 65, one of the two, and it was having some trouble actually. It only turned on after a couple of tries, and I definitely knew that wasn't normal. And then when I tried with the 85-watt AC adapter, it was fine. And it turns out when I did some research, that's the one you're supposed to use. Right beside it, you've got a gigabit Ethernet port. Beside it, you have a FireWire port. I'm not sure which version of FireWire it is. Let me look real quick. FireWire 800, so I think that's 800 megabits per second. Right next to it, you've got Thunderbolt 1, because Thunderbolt 2 wouldn't come out until, I believe, the next year in Actually, no, I think it was 2 years later. It was 2013. So this is limited to, 10 gigabits per second, which is comparable to modern-day USB-A 3.1 Gen 2, which I believe runs at the same speed. But speaking of USB-A, right beside it, you've got 2 USB-A ports. They're both USB 2. So not that fast. Then you've also got your SD card slot, and you've got your headphone slot, or your headphone jack, and your microphone jack. Right over here, as you can see, if I can get it to focus, just barely, you got this little button, which when you press it, gives you a basic indicator of the battery, which I'm not sure about the battery health of this thing, but clearly it does. I guess you could say it's holding a charge, because I'm getting something out of there. I did charge it earlier today. So that's a good sign. I obviously can't check the battery health because I can't get into Mac OS, but I'll go a little bit more into depth on that later. Going on to the other side, not much. You just got 2 things. You got your lock slot, which really common on old computers, not so much today. And then you've got your super drive, which is just Apple's term for their DVD drive. Obviously, it's a slot loader. As you can tell, there's no tray to come out here. And this was actually one of the last, at least the last MacBook Pros to have a DVD drive, I believe. Yeah, so the Retina MacBooks, which ditched this, came out about 9 months later, but they did release one more unibody Mac. So this should be, at least for the 15-inch model, the second to last MacBook that ever released with a disk drive. So that's interesting. So opening this thing up, and I do apologize for the 4 cases of water in the background, you'll be able to see that the inside's in pretty good shape. The screen does look a little dirty, obviously, but especially under these lighting conditions, but definitely no obvious damage. You can probably see up top there's a secure IT sticker covering the webcam, which makes me wonder if this device maybe was used by the school's IT department, but another part of me thinks that it probably was just standard issue at the time that they covered their webcams on school computers, because I know that was a common security measure taken around the time, and I know it's still is somewhat common today. I know there aren't as many fears about unauthorized access to webcams, but still, I don't know, that just gave me a little bit of pause. So maybe it was used by an IT department, maybe not. I don't know why an IT department would need a MacBook Pro, but who knows. Anyways, as you can see, you got the keyboard right here. I do believe it is backlit, but again, the machine isn't on right now, and even when I do turn it on, it didn't turn on, so I'm not sure if there's either no backlight or it's not working, or if maybe you need to be in macOS for it to actually work, because as I said earlier, there's no drive, so I can't boot into macOS, and I will show you guys that in a second after I go over the inside a little bit more. But yeah, as you can see, the webcam's covered, the keyboard, you can probably hear that, still feels and sounds great, which probably one of the better MacBook keyboards I've felt, and I'd say it definitely beats the keyboard on my MacBook I use today, which is a M1 Pro, MacBook Pro 14. So, and those are known for their good keyboards, and I'd say this is better. Just a lot more travel, which I do like, and they sound nice, and the feedback's great, so that's good. I'm not 100% sure all the keys work, because the one screen I can access doesn't give me the ability to test the keys, but I'd be very surprised if any of these keys didn't work. As far as I'm aware, these units weren't known for any keyboard issues, which is great. That would really be a shame if they did. Obviously that came along with the butterfly keyboard. No issues here. As you can probably tell based on how the light is reflecting off this screen is matte. The screen that shipped on the base model of this machine, which I'll talk a little bit more about why I don't think that this is the base model in a second. But the base model shipped with a glossy screen that was, I believe it was 1440 by 900, and you could upgrade it to a high resolution screen that I believe was, let me look at the number right here. There it is, yeah, 1680 by 1050. That was their high-res anti-glare display. It was high-res because obviously it was a higher resolution, and anti-glare because it was matte instead of glossy. And if this was a glossy display, you'd be seeing my reflection pretty clearly right now. You can maybe just barely make out a silhouette, but it would be a lot more obvious. So the display upgrade over the base model was you paid an extra $100, you got the high-resolution glossy display, and if you paid an extra $150 over the base model, you'd get the high-resolution anti-glare display. So it's nice to see that they have that, because not that 900p is exactly low resolution these days, but it's nice to take the extra resolution where you can get it, and I'd say that's pretty close to modern these days. I'd say 1080p is still very acceptable, and 1050 is pretty close, so I can't complain. It's a good it's got to have a good screen. Obviously I don't know if there's any graphical issues, but the one screen I can see no issues, and in fact I actually will turn this on just to show you that it is in fact working. Probably just heard the drive, just heard the chime, and it does turn onto a gray screen, and if you do give it a second, you will get the flashing folder with a question mark, which is what these MacBooks, and I'm pretty sure, I think most modern MacBooks, if you can remove the drive, which most of them you can't, they'll still display this. It is a flashing folder with a question mark on it, which is just indicative of the fact that there's no drive in here, which it does take a second. Every time I've turned it on, it has taken a second, but the good news is I do have this computer turned on right now. As you can see, there's no charger plugged in to the charging port right now, but it's on. Yep, there's the folder, but yeah, the computer's on, no signs of it being immediately about to turn off, which is great. So I guess it can hold at least enough of a charge to not immediately power off, so the battery's immediately dead, which is great. But yeah, as you can see right there, you got the flash, which that does give me some encouraging news actually, because these models are actually known for some GPU issues, which we'll go into later. And typically, if this computer does have a faulty GPU, you'd hear the startup chime that you may have heard, a little bit ago, but you'd get a black screen instead of the gray with the flashing question mark. So this is actually good news. Obviously, I can't do any more diagnostic testing, and I can't see the actual exact specs of this machine if I don't have access to macOS. Someone in the comments, please correct me if I'm wrong. I have very little experience with Macs, but you know, outside of using one today, so I don't have experience with working with them. But that's an encouraging sign. The computer at least can post, which is good. No signs of obvious damage. The covered up webcam is definitely interesting, but I guess now that I've gone over the inside of the machine, or not the inside, but I've just gone over the screen and the keyboard, I'm going to take the cover off this thing, and I'm going to show you guys the inside, and then I'll go over the specs real quick. Before I open this thing up, I just want to go over two things real quick. First of all, you can see at the top right here, and then over here you can see the screws used on this are just standard Phillips screws, so it's pretty easy to take the case of this thing off and access what's inside, which is great. Obviously, I don't know when, but Apple did switch to, I wouldn't say proprietary screws, but they did switch to a less common screw format, which I guess makes these things a little bit less accessible to people, so I guess it's good that it's using something a little bit more standard. But other than that, you can see right here we got the serial number. It's not really confidential, but considering I can't get into macOS and see what exactly is in this machine, this is what's helping me guess what's inside here, because as I said earlier, there was a base model and then there was a higher end model. I don't know if I specified that part, but I did mention there were upgrades. This serial number essentially helped me determine that this is probably the higher end configuration, and then from there I can make some pretty educated guesses about what was inside this thing. Not with 100% certainty, but I'm pretty sure I know what's inside, and then once I do eventually fix this thing up, I'll probably make another video where I clarify, but this is what's helping me make some of my educated guesses right here. So taking the cover off this thing, you can get a pretty good look inside. It's pretty simple, and for modern day Mac standards, it's got a lot that's accessible. I'm just going right off the bat. The thing that really sticks out, I guess, in terms of the actual part that you can take out and exchange pretty easily is you got your RAM sticks. In here you got two slots, one under the other, and the one that's under there is actually pretty hard to get out. I took it out earlier just to see how easy it was to get out, and it was so difficult I actually ended up taking out the battery just to get it done. But so you can see right here, we've got a 4GB RAM stick. It is, apologies for the focus issue, yep, PC3, which means that it's DDR3. The RAM in this machine is 1333 megahertz, so 1333, and there's two sticks of this, meaning that this has 8GB of DDR3, which not bad for the time, not at all, and definitely passable today. You know, you can still get by with 8GB of RAM. I'm not going to say that you're going to be doing much with it, but it's passable. This particular machine likely shipped with either 4 or 8GB of RAM. If you got the 4GB configuration, it would be two sticks of 2GB, and then if you got the 8GB configuration, it'd be two sticks of 4. Officially, this MacBook is only supported up to 8GB, but from the research I did online, it appears that this can work pretty easily with, not pretty easily, it works without, you know, any additional steps if you pop in two sticks of 8GB. So you can do 16 on this without really having to do anything, and it appears that it's supported unofficially. So no real issues there with the memory, and not much more to say about that. So I guess I'll move on to what's right next to it, and I will talk about the battery. Again, as you can see, not much you can probably see from here, and I'd have to zoom in pretty far for you guys to see what's on here, but it's a battery. Don't know what else to say. It's 77.5 megawatt hours, so definitely pretty high up there. Again, I'm not sure how much life this thing has left in it, but it does work. It was able to stay on for a few minutes, so I know it's not totally destroyed, which is great news for me. Online, I saw that this was originally rated for 7 hours. May have said that earlier, but yeah, rated for 7 hours. My guess is at max this thing lasts 2, but even then, that might be asking too much. Moving past that, over here we've got the Super Drive, which again is just the DVD drive. Takes up a bunch of space. You might be able to see right here that this is plugged into just a standard SATA slot, and as far as I'm aware, it is possible to take this drive out and use it as a second SATA slot, so you can have two drives in here. Obviously, right down here, you've got the empty drive slot. As you can see, SATA 3. This particular model most likely shipped, because it's the higher end model, most likely shipped with a 750 gigabyte 5400 RPM hard drive, which was pretty standard for the time. Apple wouldn't try to standardize SSDs until they released their first Retina MacBook, which was a year later. So standard for the time. They did offer upgrades to 7200 RPM for an extra $50, which is kind of steep even for them. And then you could also get a SATA SSD, but it was absurdly expensive. Just for reference, I looked on the Wayback Machine today, compared to the standard 750 gigabyte 5400 RPM hard drive. If you wanted a 512 gigabyte SATA 3 SSD, it would cost you an extra $1,200, which is, even for the time, just absolutely obscene. I'm not gonna lie. Obviously there's nothing in it right now, because that's just standard security practice. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna buy an SSD for this so that I can get macOS running on it. Originally shipped with OS X Lion, and it does have official support up to OS X High Sierra, which I believe released, I want to say around 2015 or 2016, but I don't know my macOS release years. But it's High Sierra isn't exactly modern these days, but I'd be willing to bet you can get by with it. And there are actually ways with these older Macs to get around that requirement. You can run modern macOS on these with little to no issues. I will probably touch on that in a later video when the SSD does come in, but that's just good to know. This is where the drive would be, and it will be after I have that drive come in. I'm not sure if there's a caddy that's supposed to be with this, or if you can kind of just shove it in here. I'd wager there's a caddy based on the screw holes that you might be able to barely just see right there, but I'm not 100% sure. So moving beyond these two things, I'm going to talk about the things that aren't visible, which is the CPU and the GPU. I'll go over the CPU first because that's not as complicated. For this particular model, there were 3 CPU options. So for the lower end configuration I've been talking about, the only CPU I believe it could ship with was a 2.2 gigahertz quad-core i7, which, as you probably know, when Apple was shipping Intel Macs, they would never say what the exact SKU was of Intel processor, but in case you're curious, it's a 2675 QM, which I hadn't heard of that one before doing the research for this video. So my guess is it's some sort of low power option made for not machines like this, but just made for made for machines like this. I'm gonna eat my words right there. But so that was the option in the base model, and then in the higher end model, which I believe this is, there's a 2.4 gigahertz option and a 2.5 gigahertz option, and those use a 2760 QM and a 2860 QM respectively. And as you could probably guess from the 2 at the start of the name, that means that they are Sandy Bridge processors. So that's about as old as you can get, in my opinion, with Intel processors, and still have them be capable of modern tasks. So good enough, I suppose. If you wanted to do modern tasks, again, you'd be kneecapped by the fact you can't really use modern macOS officially. So there is that. But those are your CPU options. An upgrade isn't possible unless you want to replace the whole logic board, which in that case, these days you'd probably best just getting a different MacBook. Because the price would probably be too high. I'm not 100% sure, but if you want to replace the CPU, you are going to need a different logic board, which I'm guessing the CPU is under one of these two and the GPU is on the other. But moving on to the GPU, that's the more fun one, I suppose. I don't know if fun's the right word. Both the high-end configuration and the low-end configuration would use a mobile Radeon GPU. The lower-end configuration would use a 6750M, which had 512 megabytes, so half a gigabyte of VRAM. I know it used GDDR. I couldn't tell you which version it used. My guess is either 3 or 5. And then the higher end configuration used had a 6770M with 1 gigabyte of VRAM. Not that interesting at the outset, but what's very unique but what's very unfortunate about these GPUs, and I touched on it earlier, is the fact that they are extremely failure prone. I couldn't find any figures on what proportion of the GPU or what proportion of these computers had a failing GPU, but from what I could tell, it was very high. In fact, to the point that Apple eventually did offer to repair the GPU. I believe they just replaced the logic board that had the GPU on it. They offered to repair it for free. There's actually a class action lawsuit filed. So definitely not good news if you're someone who's picked up one of these machines and you haven't tested it. Again, based on the fact that I was able to power on the machine and see something on the screen, the gray screen with the flashing folder icon, that makes me optimistic that the GPU hasn't at least completely failed. There might be some artifacting issues because from what I've read, there'd be graphical glitches and overheating, and then eventually the logic board would crap out and would fail, and then you have to replace it. So I'm crossing my fingers. Hoping that there's no major issues, but I won't be able to know for sure until I can get into macOS and perform some actual, real, intensive tasks. As far as I'm aware, there is a workaround if you are unable to, if you're unable to replace the GPU and it is failing, there is a way somehow to disable it, and then you run on the integrated GPU, because the i7 in here does have Intel HD graphics. I couldn't tell you the exact numbered variation of it, but it does have integrated graphics. So there is a way to use exclusively that. Obviously, if you're doing anything that's video intensive, it's going to take a big performance hit, but my guess is if you're using one of these computers today, you're probably not using it for video intensive tasks. So that's the basic gist on the GPU, which not a lot of great news there. And that's the general overview of the system specs, which I'll actually put the cover back on, and then I will continue a little bit after I flip this thing over, which I will do right now. That's the general overview of just the system and the specs inside it. In regards to what exactly I'm going to do with this laptop, like I said, it's pretty old. It's 13 years old. So probably not much you could do on it today in terms of tasks that are actually intensive, but I'm willing to bet that if I put the SSD I have coming in this computer and I use what's called OpenCore to install modern macOS, or maybe I won't use, the most recent version of macOS, maybe I'll go back a version or two, so I'll have recent macOS that still has security updates, so it still has some form of support. I'll update to that, and given the fact that I'll probably be able to do that, and the specs inside this really aren't bad. I might upgrade it to 16 gigs of RAM, and then I have a hyper-threaded quad-core i7. It can still serve perhaps maybe as a backup computer. I might keep it laying around in case, maybe my MacBook gets stolen, or I drop it, and I need a computer to use for a few days while I wait for it to get repaired, or I wait to get a new one. This definitely could serve as a backup computer. I'm just not sure, if I don't use it for that, what else I would use it for. If you guys have any ideas, I'd love to hear them, because a machine that I got for this cheap that appears to be in good shape and isn't that weak for modern standards, I feel like I should do something with it. So if you can think of any other idea that isn't just having a backup computer, I'd love to hear them, because all I really got to do is set this thing up, test it for any GPU issues, and if it doesn't have any, I've got a pretty decent Mac on my hands, even if it is pretty old. So that's my general overview and just rambling about this MacBook. So if you have any recommendations about what I should do with it, or just any recommendations for maybe what I should talk about in the future, feel free to let me know, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a nice day.